Next week, we'll see leaders from more than 50 African countries converging in New Delhi for the third India-Africa Forum Summit. It will be one of the biggest summits that New Delhi has ever hosted. Ahead of the summit, the fourth India-Africa Trade Ministers meeting took place in New Delhi today, where the need for greater economic cooperation between India and the African continent was underlined.
India is set to host the big India-Africa Forum Summit, the biggest summit that New Delhi will be hosting since the NAM Summit of 1984. More than 50 heads of state are expected to attend the summit, and New Delhi is doing its best to make sure that the summit becomes a grand success. At least 41 countries will participate at the level of President, Vice President, Prime Minister and King. 11 will be represented by ministers and 2 by officials. Similar summits hosted by the US, China and Japan have got participation of 48 to 50 countries.
A continent which has large amounts of arable land. It's a continent which is resource rich. It is a demographically young continent. 65% of African population is under the age of 35. It's got a long coastline, very important in trade and strategic terms, 26,000 kilometers.
And the focus before the summit was trade ministers meet. Trade ministers from African countries met on Friday in a day-long session which called for exploring new opportunities. 37 CEOs from Africa and 30 CEOs from India also participated in the meet.
We did identify areas of common interest, and when we had the business-to-business, post-business-to-business interaction, when the business leaders also joined us, it has emerged very clearly that infrastructure, expanding the scope of agriculture, energy, human resource development, and healthcare seem to be the areas in which there is immediate possibility of cooperation with African countries.
The first India-Africa Summit took place in 2008 in New Delhi, the second in 2011 in the Ethiopian capital, and now in 2015 in New Delhi again. But what differentiates this summit from previous summits is the fact that more than 50 heads of state from Africa will take part in this year's summit. The summit is important for India since it has a lot at stake in Africa in economic, trade and cultural spheres. India and Africa trade have multiplied 20 times in last 15 years and doubled in last 5 years to reach $72 billion in 2014-15. Growing investment by Indian companies in Africa is now estimated in the range of 30 to 35 billion US dollars spread across a range of sectors. In last decade, a total of almost 9 billion US dollars in concessional credit has been approved for nearly 140 projects in more than 40 African countries by the government of India. So far, nearly 60 projects have been completed. Since 2011 alone, India has provided over 24,000 scholarships to African countries. And historically, India and Africa have a lot in common. Mahatma Gandhi's stay in South Africa between 1893 and 1915 remains one of the main events that have paved the road to modern-day political relations between India and the African countries. With Amrit Pal Singh, Siddhant Sibal, DD News, New Delhi.